Hello, I've just read chapter 3 of Last of the Jedi, Reckoning. So, Vader's left the Imperial hangar and is making his way towards the Republic Towers, and we're told he didn't like how long he spent on Alderaan. And apparently Jenna's Arbor has ignored his messages. And he thinks once he answers the memory agent, he'll slap her in an Imperial prison and see how she liked it. And again, we found out things hasn't gone well on Alderaan. The Emperor was displeased with his performance, and he had put Feather Solon under his command. And he thinks it's impossible, and he wouldn't stand for it. He'd find a way around it, and he knows Palpatine's testing him. And he thinks if he can get rid of his memories, he'll be stronger. And if Padme didn't still visit his dreams that night, he would be able to rest and will be free. And he stops in the lobby and asks if Jenna San Arbor was in residence, and the clerk says yes. She accepts deliveries for food, and he'll contact her and announce him. Vader says don't, just unlock the security. He's going up, and he makes his way up, and he thinks that soon you'll have peace. And San Arbor was a vain, infuriating, pompous harridan, but she was also brilliant, and she would save him. And then he would throw her in prison again. No, he hasn't thrown her in prison yet, so that's what I didn't mean again. But the turbo lift opens, and he makes his way toward her room. And San Arbor's curled up on her couch, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. And there's a table of teapots and teacups in front of her, and some tea spilled on the floor. Vader says that she's ignored his messages, and she doesn't turn, and he comes a bit closer. And he notices she's talking to herself. The formula for toxin derived from C-Tentium is... I knew it once. Oh, I think I did. I was born on Moseum. I remember that. I don't remember when I came here. My bank account's somewhere. Have to remember where. Have to... And she thumps her head several times. And she says, the delivery system for toxins into water is... I once had a silk gown that everyone admired. And she starts drinking some tea and says, my favourite tea was Tareem. No, it was Hanite. No, Flushberry Blossom. And Vader asks what she's doing, and she asks if she knows him, because again, remember, Nilena Nautri injected her with the memory agent. She asks if he knows him, and he says, oh, I do, don't I? And she says that she can't remember things, but she thinks very, very hard she might. And she asks Vader if he remembers his her Sept silk gown, and if he can tell her what colour it was. And Vader's horrified, and he makes his way to her bedroom and sees the data port is gone and all her files and records. And he gets angry. He knows that Olin's behind this, and technically he is. But he was on Alderaan, and it was Trevor Flume, Mygal, and Lina Nautri that wiped all Lina Nautri got rid of the files. Mygal and Trevor rescued Lina. And Vader thinks that his last chance for peace is gone, and that Padme will always be with him now. And the memory of her softness, her smiles, and her horror as the Force choked her, wanting her limp and wanting to show her. Wanting to make her pay for her disloyalty in his own mind, his own words. And around him the walls begin to crack. We knew Vader was going to be in for a massive shock when this happened. You know, as soon as San Arbor forgot about her, started losing her memory, we knew Vader was going to be in it. Was going to be in for it when it comes down to the shock. So it's great to see his reaction here. Now it goes from horrified to furious, you know. Actually, I'm going to check, because I didn't actually check it. Okay, yes, it is 21 chapters. And 151 pages, so not that much. It's actually 2 pages shorter, but also 2 chapters shorter than actually not 2 pages, 3 pages and 2 chapters shorter than the last book. But yeah, so far this book's been quite good. Again, Vader in this chapter. Oh, poor Vader. I know he's wanting to forget, but... And of course we know he wasn't going to forget. We knew he wasn't going to forget, because he remembers being Anakin in the original trilogy. But I think it was nice, it was a fun idea to dabble around with. And I like how its storyline with Vader, you know, it very much focused on Vader's disloyalty, not on Padme's disloyalty to him, which he thought she was being disloyal. She wasn't. She didn't even know Obi-Wan was on her ship. But I like how it dabbled in that, because you very rarely see people bring up how Vader thought Padme had betrayed him and was disloyal to him. You know, you very rarely see people saying that, and I like that this book, that these books have actually delved into that, and delved into it not just to how much he loved her, but also to how much he now despised her, and how he wanted to forget. It's literally a plot point in the series, in these books now, that he knows just how much Padme hurt him, how much it hurts him to think of the love he had for her, and how much it hurts him to think of her betrayal, and that's why he wants to forget. And it's a storyline that you wouldn't, that I think most fans wouldn't have come up with, but you know, I think it's quite interesting that one of those reasons was because he still views Padme as betraying him. And I think this was quite a good storyline, but simply because of that idea alone. I do think the way it was went about with it could have been done a little bit better. It certainly could have been done a little bit better. I think it was a bit of I think this storyline in rescuing Nina in the last book, you know, that was a bit too, that literally only took over the course of 4 chapters, you know, which is pretty much, and the chapters themselves weren't that long really. And then you know, it seemed like we were really building up to something in Secret Weapon and against the Empire, but it just feels like a guy just went a bit down the drain a little bit with how it was concluded in this book. And now on Jenna's part, now we have a proper conclusion here. I think I think Vader's reaction just kind of salvaged the conclusion. We knew he was going to be upset, but you know, I think Vader's reaction here just kind of salvaged the swiftness of how it was done in that book. But yeah, and I quite like Jenna in this chapter as well, just trying to remember, even though that, you know, out of all the people, well, she probably forgot it, but you know, she knows she's forgotten. It would probably be useless to remember. But you know, I like seeing how she seems much more, a little bit more human now, you know. She's trying to remember, and even though she has still definitely got some of that evilness in her, you know, she's still trying to remember her experiments, but it for some reason feels a lot more human, and it feels, for some reason, she doesn't feel as morally wrong in this chapter. It's quite interesting. It's very interesting, and she has a very different feel about her. So yeah, and also, you know, she's talking about her teas, her sepsilk gown. So it was a very it was quite an entertaining chapter, this one. Yeah. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. So I've just read chapter 4 of Last of the Jedi. Reckoning. I almost said against the Empire. Why am I still wanting to say against the Empire? But Reckoning, and we're finally back with Clive and Astrid. And it turns out there was a reason why it was such an abrupt end for their storyline in that book. Because they've been trapped in that room for 2 days. And it says they have been trapped they have been trapped for 2 days now, and the morning of the 3rd day, they knew they had to get out or they would die. And it's all they ration their food, but they hadn't had much to start, and they tried everything they knew to escape the Eve Yarrow's home on Reverie, and the room that they're trapped in. But they're still trapped, and little Clive finally has a lock he could not spring. And you can see that Astrid's growing weak, and he tried to give her some of her protein pellets, but was only met with fury from her. And she's sat against the wall with her head against it, and she's trying to conserve energy now. They both are, and she says, what really bugs me is that we still don't know. If I'm going to die in a small white cube, I'd really like to know why. Clive says that she's not going to die. And Astrid asks if he's not afraid, and Clive says he's not afraid, he's just mad, and says whoever designed this, why would they want to starve intruders to death? And Astrid says that they're in a remote area and it would take too long to get here, and if he sees Eve Yarrow's pace, she doesn't want anybody to know it's her place, so she doesn't trust anyone. And then Clive realises for a moment that what if they're only assuming this is a trap, and it isn't? And Astrid asks what it is then, and Clive says it could be a place for Eve to hide herself. And Astrid asks who, and Clive says anyone, and if he's right about her, she's playing a dangerous game. If someone came looking for her, she could she ducks in here and waits it out. And Astrid says, okay, but how does that help us? We're still trapped. And Clive says that means there's a way out, and Astrid says, but we've checked all the walls and we checked the ceiling, and they've gone over every inch. The walls are solid, the ceiling's stone. And then she slaps at the ground, and Clive goes, exactly. And he says, for some stupid reason we didn't check the floor. And he starts searching each stone on the floor, and nothing seems amiss, and Astrid sits in the middle of the floor with her head in her hands, and says if it was her, she'd want a hint. There's lots of stones on that floor. And she says to Clive, wait a second, remember how we got stuck in this place? And Clive says that you saw that painting and tilted it, and the hologram sent a beam of light to the lock. Press so, we were in jail. And Astrid closes her eyes to try and remember what she had done. What had happened. She replayed it in her mind, had tilted the painting, the door swung open, she walked forward, and the beam had not only opened the door, but also entered the small room and had been angled toward the floor. And she starts moving forward and places her hands on the rock that looks like all the others, and she goes, this one, and she thinks it would be easy to do. And she knows there will be a release somewhere, and she eventually finds part of the rock that has a jagged edge, but it fits perfectly into the mortar. So she pushes against it, and then with nothing, she pulls it, and then there's nothing. So then she pulls it, and underneath she finds something, a miniature sensor that's grey like the rock and is embedded in it. And she presses it, and the rock slides upwards and hangs in the air, held up by an invisible jet of air. And Clive goes, stars and planets, you did it. And she reaches down into the hole, and she picks up a small controller that fits in her palm. And she hands it, and she holds it up to Clive and says that this is her way out. And Clive warns her to be careful because it probably is trapped, and if someone else uses it, it could fuse the lock. And she hands it to Clive and says, that's your department. And Clive says there's probably some special code, and he's going to have to circumvent. Which she'll have to circumvent. And he works carefully. And he says, bypass the initial system, reinstall my own code directly. Okay, let's try this. And Astrid asks if it doesn't work, and Clive says, well, we're stuck, or maybe poison gas gets released. And Astrid goes, you had to mention that. Um, and Clive smiles, and his face starts to fill with sweat. And accusing the numbers, they hear a click and the door opens, and Astrid yells out that you're a genius. She embraces him. And Clive says into her curls of hair, about time you recognised it. And then she draws back a bit embarrassed, and they walk back out. And I like that moment. You know, we've kind of been building up a relationship between the two of them. You know, if this is like the last book of the series, I am kind of hoping that Trevor will wind up with Astrid and Loon. It's like, where's he going to go? Because I'm fairly sure he doesn't stay with Ferris. I'm fairly sure of that, because I know it's like he dies between like this book and Rebel Force apparently, and Loon says that he dies in a factory while being part of a rebellion or resistance cell. So I know he doesn't stay with Ferris because he stays behind an older one. It's going to be like, so if I think it's more than likely to either stay with either the Erased or Astrid and Loon, and maybe Clive if he survives. But anyway, together. But they then Clive and Astrid leave the room together, and after Clive's replaced the sense of sweet and stone, and they still didn't want to leave any evidence of their presence, and Clive says, well, the next step is obvious. Refrigerator maid. And Astrid says, yes, we need food and water, but after and then she stops abruptly. They hear someone coming through the back door, and Clive grabs her arm. They try to race to the stairs, but are stopped when they hear a voice say, there's a blaster aimed at you, stop. And Clive says, sounds like a good idea to stop. And they turn around at the person's command, and it says they met the eyes of a curious creature, small, fine bones with pale green skin and tentacles wrapped around her head like a turban. In the instant it took to size her up, Clive decided it would be a bad idea to try to disarm her, and she asks, and the caretaker, and she's the one that's holding the blaster is a caretaker. And she asks, care to tell me what you're doing here? And Clive says they're friends of the owner, and Eve asks them then. She says, didn't she tell you? And she says, do I look like I was brought up in Gullible land? And Clive shakes his head and says, no, definitely not. He says, definitely not. I'd peg you for smart land any day of the week. And she asks what they're after, and Astrid decides that they might as well tell a partial truth. They can see by the servant. She can see by the servant's simple and mended garb and her ancient boots that she must not be paid very well to be a caretaker. And she says they think Eve Yarrow might be trying to hurt their friends, so they broke in looking for information. And Clive adds that if they let them go, they'll make it worth their while. You can tell that the caretaker hasn't tried to defend Eve Yarrow, and that tells him everything he needed to know. And the caretaker lowers her blaster and says, well, why didn't you say so? I'm no friend of the Empire. Relief courses through Clive, because it isn't often he catches a break like this. And she says that she's just an employee, and as long as you don't track mud on the floor, she doesn't care. She just came to prepare the house for a visit. And either Clive or Astrid, I assume it's Clive, says, is she coming? And she says, and the caretaker says, so she says, and she'll have a visitor. And she looks at the security monitor and says, looks like he's arrived. And Astrid asks if she knows who it is, and the caretaker says to look for themselves. And they see Darth Vader striding away from a sleek cruiser. And Clive says, I think it's safe to say that Eve Yarrow is working with the Empire, which we kind of already knew, because she has the Stone Emperor's favour, which is given to the elite of the Empire. And the caretaker suggests them to go through a door in the kitchen that leads to a service alley, and it can take them to a back path up the cliff, and they can't see, and no one can see it from the house. And Astrid and Clive exchange glances, because this is their chance to finally learn something. And Astrid says that they're staying. And that's where we end the chapter. When I saw the line, "You're not going to die," before I read the chapter, I was kind of expecting Astrid to have some sort of panic attack. But I think that mainly just came from the episode of High Potential that came out earlier this month. What was it? The Faust and the Furious? Yeah, that was the episode. Where Morgan has a bit of a panic attack happen. And she's thinking, "Oh, I can't leave my kids." And it's a really great scene in the show. I'd say it's probably the best scene in the show. Out of the 2 seasons they have so far. I'm currently recording this on the 25th, so the third part of this season still hasn't come out yet. But anyway, I quite enjoy this chapter, and I was kind of expecting Astrid to have some sort of panic attack, because her son is still on the asteroid. But I'm surprised there was no mention of her son. I would have expected that, but then again, they've been in this place for 2 days, She's probably had a chance to get that out of her system. But I do like how the two were interacting, Clive, he's trying to reassure her. And he has confidence. He has the confidence and hope that Astrid is pretty much lost. And it's really sweet to see him there for her when she needs it. Especially because she's been on her own for so long. Running from the Empire, trying to protect Loon, and running from Bog, and I think it's sweet to see someone there caring for her. And I think that's something that we've really needed, I think that she's really needed. Also, I quite like that moment where she embraces Clive after calling him a genius. It's another slow step. They're really playing the slow game here. They're really doing a will they, won't they? Jude Watson is, but I really like that moment. I think I'm kind of encouraging for them to get together. I think you can kind of tell that's where their story's headed. If they don't wind up getting together and Clive or Astrid dies, I think I can kind of see them professing their love to each other in that moment, if they do die. And if one of them dies, I doubt both of them will die. Paul, I doubt that kind of coolness is going to be done to Paul Loon. But you never know, maybe it will. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that proceeds for them. And I really like this chapter to kind of take a bit of its time and really kind of reaffirms how, and kind of to spend that time to kind of show us how the two of them are kind of there for each other, even, and Astrid still has her use in the room, she was the one that was able to remember and figure out where it was. You can see the skills and relevance for both of their characters coming through here. Clive was quite crafty, and even though it only says that Clive had tried to spring the lock, Astrid was a slicer, so we can kind of presume she also had a go at it as well. But we see both of them having some relevance. Astrid's the one who finds the key to get out. Clive is the one that makes the key work, and you really see them working together there, and it's quite a sweet moment as well. Again with the caretaker, it's going to be curious to see if she gets named. I know that's I don't know why out of everything, that's the one where I hope she gets named. It would not surprise me if she gets named, because there have been quite a few characters in these books who just get referred to as something like the caretaker, or, you know, the gardener, and then they get referred to as, and then they finally get name drops. Like the gardener I'll just refer to, right, ended up being called Russell Wake. I think that was his name, Russell Wake. I know it was Russell. So, so we're not surprised when she gets named. So yeah. We also have a bit of a new time frame given. We just gotta wait until all the contradictions come in. That makes the time frame since book 7 really confusing. I've been trying to keep. I've actually started writing down the time frames for these books. Since I started reading, I think it was book 7 or book 6. I started keeping track of the time frames. They hardly make sense. They hardly make sense. It really just says and you kind of have to make assumptions to get a proper time frame, which doesn't really work. Which of course isn't really the best thing. But yeah. But yeah, I quite enjoy this chapter. Of course, Vader's here. It's going to be... Flame is in the next chapter, speaking of Solace. So I don't know if I doubt she's actually Eve Yarrow in that case. But if she is Eve Yarrow, then that's going to be curious to see how that goes, Unless of course, this is taking place a little bit before. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that Eve Yarrow stuff goes. So yeah. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 5 of Last of the Jedi Reckoning. Technically I'm almost a quarter of the way through the book, but it still feels like it's at the very beginning because it's chapter 5. I did kind of spoil... I keep spoiling myself. I've got to stop looking at Wikipedia when it comes to Last of the Jedi. Well, it's only a books, really. But, even with Wikipedia, I brought it up many times. It is unreliable when it comes to Last of the Jedi. With the exception of a couple pages that I can verify are reliable, like Hydra's page, because I've literally written that page for the most part. A lot of the Suspicious Movement page, most of them are just not that reliable. Not most of them, but some of them are, and yeah, it's a bit whack sometimes. But anyway, this is the summary for chapter 5. They buy some ships and they're ready to go. They can literally just be brought down to that. But Flame, Trevor, Solace, and Mygal, they've made their way to the Galactic Luxury Starship Manufacturers Convention. Try saying that 10 times fast. The GLSMC. The GLSMC. And I actually did quite enjoy this chapter. It kind of... Even though this book came out quite a few years before it, I think it was like 10 years before it. Well, 9 actually. But it does remind me a lot of Freemaker Adventures Season 2, if you remember that. If you remember that show. Most Star Wars fans don't, as far as I'm aware. But in that show, it was in Season 2, and they went to like a starship bidding, the Freemakers, to buy an Ember Steel ship. I think it was I think the episode was called the Ember Steel Blade or something like that. And it was so they could get a blade for the arrowhead, from the metal of an Ember Steel ship. And this kind of brings me back to that. I kind of was picturing like the setting off of that episode in this moment. So it did very much kind of bring me back to Freemaker Adventures, which I'm always welcome to. I always welcome. Seriously, if you've not watched Freemaker Adventures, I would highly recommend it. Anyway, they made Flame, Trevor, Solace, and Mygal have made their way to the Galactic Luxury Starship Manufacturers Convention. And we're told this is a convention that was renowned among the elite of the galaxy, as it's an annual trade show that gave previews of prototypes and new models of personal crafts. Luxury models could be ordered before they hit showroom floors, and the wealthiest competed to see who could get the fantastically expensive chips first. And Flame meets Solace, Trevor and Rygal by the VIP entrance. And we're told that Ferris was joining them at the hangar. It just says the hangar, but it's like the hangar at the Orange District, if you remember, the secret one. Well, the more, not the secret one, the one where you don't have to do check-ins. And we're told that because he's a double agent, it's best if he keeps a low profile. And Flame hands out some identity tags to Flame, Trevor and Rygal, and says this will get you into all restricted areas. We can take off from the hangar here. The salesmen are authorised to push through temporary ship registries on the spot. And Trevor asks, don't they still need background checks? And Flame says they'll forego the background checks with the right incentives. And the galaxy hasn't changed that much yet, and the rich get what they want. And she says to just follow her lead, and she's already checked out the displays and picks her new transports. And picks out their new transports. And they put on their identity tags on their tunics and make their way in, and Trevor just swallows. The sight is just an awe. It's just awe to him. He's just, it's all his eyes are dazzled by chromium hulls, rainbow-hued viewports and laser-baked paintwork. And the cockpit hulls are open to show all the luxury seating and lounges. And with top-of-the-line steering and propulsion controls, and then there were the observation levels with multi-level seating and the next generation of service droids and servant droids and protocol droids, and just turns in a circle overwhelmed, and Flame tells him to focus, and they got a job to do. And she says it with a grin. And Flame leads them through the convention, and we're told most of the attendees are dressed in opulent capes and towering headdresses that were quickly becoming the mark of high style for the wealthy in the galaxy. And they threads their way through the crowds lined up to climb the newest models to a corner where a smaller company had been set up, a fairly new company. And the banner reads Sleeker Systems, the highest ranking, the most personal service. Flame says that she's researched the company and they're new and aren't big, but they have prime technology and they're trying to crack the market cornered by the big guys, and they'll be more willing to make a deal. And she's already set up the appointments and said that they are a small company with offices on different planets in the core, and they need some fast luxury ships. And they approach the salesman. Trevor can see the eagerness in his eyes as they approach, and Flame briefly explains who they are and what they need. And the salesman sweeps his arms to the prototypes behind him and says, "You're welcome to climb aboard and take a look. Sit in the pilot's seat of these babies. I guarantee I'm going to have to pry you out of there with a servo driver. You've got the highest system specs in the business, hyperdrives on all models, twin-ion engines, but do we scrimp on luxury? No, sir. Corellian leather and conform seating, the deepest plush levels in the industry." And Trevor doesn't need urging. He immediately makes his way up the ramp. And he checks out the console and thinks, sweet, major powerful screen nav devices and great visibility. And Rygal climbs down into the engine well, and Solace crouches to examine the under console and says that she could install some laser cannons without too much trouble, but it's going to take too long. And so it's the best they can do is rely on what they've got and just fly fast. And Trevor looks at the viewport and sees Flames talking to the salesman, and things don't seem to be going too well. He's shaking his head, the salesman. And Trevor says it looks like Flame could use some help. And Solace and Rygal and Trevor make their way down the ramp, and the salesman says, "Love to help you. Love to accommodate you. I can't. I need the prototypes here to sell. You can't. Can you? You can see that, right? Can't sell the ships if the public can't see them. Am I right? I can get you ships in 2 weeks, a month tops." Flame says, but I'm telling you, if we can buy 2 ships today, I'm authorised to place a very large order. When we get back, if we like them, 15 at the minimum, maybe 20. And after all, we have to see how the ships manoeuvre. And the salesman says they have a flight simulator right here. And Weigel moves towards the salesman and uses the force to mind trick him, saying, but we look reliable, so go ahead. And of course, the salesman repeats, and sort of says, you'll need the ship registries, I'll push them through. And the salesman repeats, and he walks off. And Flame goes, so far so good, we'll be able to take off right out of the hangar here. And sort of says the danger is after they're away. Because they'll have to explain to his boss why he let the prototypes go, and they just have to hope they don't rescind those registries. Or rescind? Rescind? Never seen that word before. R-E-S-C-I-N-D. But anyway, and then Empire, then Weigel cuts in saying that or that the Empire doesn't check them over, the registries. The salesman comes out of the office and says the credit transfer went through, so they're good to go. And he says that these are your hard copies, and his hands are full of juror sheets. He says that these are their hard copies, and the ships have been coded with their registry numbers. And he's applied for a temporary registration, and it was approved. And so all they have to do is register on their homeworld when they get there. And they're authorised to fly there by a direct route, but not outside the core. And he says, so no joyrides, haha. And he says it's great to be in business with them and to use the manual mode to steer out of the hangar. And he says you're cleared for takeoff. Flame says, thank you, you are a great salesman, with a charming smile. And the salesman says, tell my boss. And Flame says, will do. And with a final cheerful wave, Flame heads for the ships, and it sort of slips into the pilot's seat of one, Weigel into the other, and Trevor and Flame climb aboard Solus's ship as passengers, and they make their way, and the hangar's adjacent to the cruisers, and they power up the engines and make their way forward, and the security check lies ahead. And Solus observes that they're Imperial guards at the security check, and Flame says it's alright, they're mainly just there for show. They're not going to stop the richest people in the galaxy. Trevor feels his heart trip against his chest, but the officers wave them through. And Weigel shoots into the space lane, and Solus follows, and they all breathe a little bit easier. And they make their way through the space lanes, and Solus observes how it feels good on the helm. And they make their way down to that hangar in the Orange District, and they land. Ferris whistles when he sees what they brought. And he goes, you sure know how to pick a ride, and he says it to Flame. And now, along with Flame's sleek cruiser, they have three fast ships. And Flame explains that with a temporary registry, leaving the core is a minor infraction, and they should try to avoid unnecessary stops. And Solus explains that each ship can hold about 30 passengers. They've broken down the resistant leaders who are coming in groups of 3s, and most of them can get off-worlds to central locations. And she says that they've got 60 leaders, so they've got plenty of room. And they each take a third of the list. Solus, Weigel and Trevor again. Not Trevor, Ferris. Why do I always get Trevor and Ferris mixed up? They never get mixed up in my mind, but whenever I'm talking about them, I get them mixed up. But anyway, Ferris, you'll only have to stop twice in the core before heading to the asteroids, but it seems like a piece of juju cake, but of course anything can go wrong. And we're told the 3 Jedi would split up, so each would be on one ship. Weigel volunteers to ride with Flame on her cruiser, and they have, because they have the most stops to make. And Trevor would ride with Ferris. And Ferris says that for now, they're on comm silence, and any emergency transmissions should go through to Toma at the base. And he says, may the Force be with them all. And that's where we end the chapter. I was half expecting an implication here. A little hint to Flame actually being Eve Yarrow. I was kind of expecting, what was the company called again? Sleeker Systems, yes, that's what it was. I was kind of expecting Sleeker Systems to kind of be like an alias for Yarrow Industries, because I'm fairly sure Yarrow Industries was a sheep company, I'm fairly sure if I'm remembering correctly. So I was kind of expecting it to be Yarrow Industries under an alias, but no, it wasn't. Which, you know, that got well quite feeded into the whole always flame Eve Yarrow or not, which I can't spoil myself on. I've brought you up at the start of this. I accidentally spoiled myself on the fact that Flame is Eve Yarrow. Again, we kind of knew where we would be going. We kind of knew that she may or may not be Eve Yarrow. We can't guess it, but it still doesn't feel quite right knowing it. And again, with how Wikipedia is, I've told you before in these reviews just how unreliable Wikipedia has been with Last of the Jedi. There's a page saying that Malorum was with Sankor in Dark Warning even though he didn't even appear in Dark Warning. There was a page saying that there was a Pierce Naturian, even though there was no Pierce Naturian. That's just got mixed up with Manili Tun. And there was a page saying there was a that guide was his own character, even though it was just Solace. You know, Donal's page used to say he was the one that betrayed Solace, which actually I found the source for that. It's in the Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia where it says that. But you know, it said it wasn't Donal who betrayed her, it was some Juro. But you know, there's lots of misinformation there with Master of the Jedi on Wikipedia, unfortunately. I even checked on Ferris's page where it said Palpatine said he had more potential than Vader and the Inquisitors. And it sourced it to Return of the Dark Side. It's like, that wasn't in Return of the Dark Side. And I think it came from the line where he says he has more potential than Vader, where Palpatine says he has more potential than Vader. But that kind of seemed more like... No, actually, that was Secret Weapon, where he says he has more potential than Vader. But that more came across like, you know, he could be more than Vader. You know, it didn't seem like power-wise, it seemed more like in general wise. You know, the way he was talking about it. But anyway, to this chapter. Again, I was kind of expecting, what was it? Again, I'm not going to remember the company name, so... Sleeker Systems. I was kind of expecting that to be Yarrow Industries. Again, it wasn't. But, you know, that could have been a nice hint if it was Yarrow Industries, but it probably would have been maybe too much of a hint. I think that would have been maybe a bit too much like, hey, you're catching on yet, you're catching on. You know, let's just give it to you now, but we'll just give the proper reveal later. So, you know, that kind of maybe it would have been a bit too much if it was Yarrow Industries. It wouldn't surprise me if it winds up dull speaking some sort of thing with Yarrow Industries, but I doubt it will. Again, the salesman. That was quite a funny thing where, you know, he was talking about how doing all this, you know, the general salesman stuff where it's trying to convince you to buy the ship. You know, very salesman stuff there, but it was also quite funny to watch. I'll read, sorry, not watch. I'm getting really bad feelings about this now, because I kind of know where this is going, but also the bad feeling mainly started with the mention of Toma, which... Again, it says he's a spy on Wikipedia. I cannot see him as a spy, and it would not surprise me if he's said to be a spy just because he got into contact with Flame and was the person who brought up Flame to them. It would not surprise me if that's why it says he's a spy, because I cannot see him working with the Empire. Especially if Flame is Eve Yarrow, you know. But then again, he doesn't know who Flame is, I'm fairly sure. It was brought up in Against the Empire. He doesn't know what Flame's identity is, but yeah. But yeah, I just can't see Tomer as an Imperial, especially with how devastated he was in Dark Warning when he gave up on the when he was told to yield and called off the attack. If you remember, it was devastated. That's how the Empire reacted to that. So yeah. Again, I quite enjoy this chapter. But I don't really have a whole lot to say on this chapter. I do not have a whole lot to say. So yeah. It could have made it a bit more clear as to which hangar Ferris was waiting in, because it just says Ferris will be waiting at the hangar. And it's like, which hangar? I'm expecting him to be in the hangar at the convention. But then it turns out it's at the hangar in the Orange District. So you could have made that clearer. Instead of just referring to it as the hangar and then showing us there's a hangar in the convention, you could have told us it's a hangar in the Orange District, so we wouldn't be left hanging like that. Because I was kind of expecting him to be at the convention's hangar, but no. So yeah, that could be made a bit more clear. But yeah, I'm quite enjoying the book so far. And it feels quite fresh. It feels like a very fresh thing. I think it's mainly because of the whole double agent stuff. You know, as much as it's been a good storyline, I do think the Adventures of Ferris and Trevor thing they were going with in the first 4 books was probably the better. Book 3 and 4, but technically 2, 3, 4. I think that was probably the better way to go about with Ferris and Trevor. As much as I've enjoyed the double agent stuff, and I think some of the best books in this series have come from the double agent stuff, I much prefer the how the dynamic with Ferris and Trevor was before Ferris was a double agent. To me, that just was a lot more enjoyable and a lot more fun, you know. It's got quite a bit serious since we've started the double agent storyline. Really, I know it's technically started in Return of the Dark Side, but I'm going to count Tangled Web as part of the double agent stuff, because technically he's working for the Empire there. Really, I should just say working for the Empire then. So yeah, and that's kind of like where the whole bits where Trevor and Ferris stopped being together as much, kind of started, and I do like that we're going back to kind of like the roots of Ferris and Trevor's dynamic in this series, in this book now, and I think it's going to be a nice kind of trip down memory lane for what's going to come, which again I'm not going to spoil if you don't know, but I've spoiled myself on it, and I know. So it's gonna, and especially because this is the last book as well, you know, it's going to be nice to see how that it even says on the first page of the next on the next book, on the next chapter, it says it was like old times, Trevor thought. So yeah, it's going to be nice to see that again. I think that's something I have definitely been missing. As much as I have enjoyed the double agent storyline, I think we're ready to go back to just the adventures of Ferris and Trevor here, and not have too much involvement of the double agent stuff. Again, the double agent stuff is fun, but it do very much feel like it restricted Ferris's interaction with the other characters. It felt a lot more like all the characters. I think Death on the Naboo has a really good thing going on where he's building up his crew. You know, you had Solace, Keats, Curran, Clive, Trevor, Flame. Not Flame, actually. No, Flame wasn't there, was she? But you know, you had a lot of the crew there. You had a lot. Flame wasn't even introduced until until Return of the Dark Side. But you know, you had a whole group of characters going on there, and I think that was quite interesting, and it definitely could have really worked out to be something very fun. But of course, they went down the Jude Watson decided to go down the double agent route, and again, I think that did bring form an interesting story. But I'm quite happy that, but at the same time, it does take. I think the books since the double agent stuff have removed a little bit of that humour they had back in the earlier books. You know, 'cause the story has gotten a lot more serious. It's gotten more serious, and again, it's kind of like growing up with its audience. You know, these books were released between 2005 and 2008. You know, that's 4 years the kids would have been reading these over. It was growing up with its audience. You know, like if you were reading if you were reading the books at 8 to begin with, you'd be 12 by the time you finished this. You know, it was. No, or no, 11. Sorry, 11. Or is it 12? You know, either way, you know, it's growing up with its audience. The humour isn't being as involved. And I think that's maybe there's just something about the double agent storyline that just feels like it's missing a little bit compared to the other books. It just feels like there's something missing, and I think it is the humour. One thing I really enjoyed about the earlier books was the humour. Anyway, so it's going to be nice to go back to having Ferris and Trevor again. As it says, it's like old times. But anyway, I had a bit of a ramble for this review, do you know? Again, I quite enjoyed this chapter. So it's going to be fun to see how things play out. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello! I have just read chapter 6 of Last of the Jedi Reckoning. Now I do apologise if I sound a bit sniffly or nasally throughout this. I have a really blocked nose for some reason, and I just can't unblock it at the moment. I've tried it, I just can't, so I apologise if I sound nasally or sniffly. So, Trevor and Ferris are flying through space, and Trevor's thinking that this is like old times. Back before Trevor was a double agent, and we're told that it's just like zooming around the galaxy together, avoiding the Empire, and so far they haven't run into any trouble. They stayed in the core, and their ship registry is passing every Imperial control, and their ship is now full of passengers anxious to get to the asteroid. And we're told, and Trevor thinks that things haven't gone this right in ages, and Ferris reads his mind, and Trevor thinks that it's a Jedi spook, and Ferris says, "Not get overconfident. They still have a long way to go." And we're told it was definitely good to see Will again, because we're told that Will managed to smuggle himself out of Balasa and came to the nearby station of Telepon. That's like, hey. He was on Coruscant at the end of Against the Empire. Did he go back to Balasa? Right then, so that's our Mac. I found where I was again. There we go. So that did confuse me a bit, because it's like he was on Coruscant at the end of Against the Empire, so I guess he just made his way back to Balasa in between Against the Empire and Master of Deception, or after that meeting in Master of Deception, you know. It's just like, where has Will been? But anyway, we're told that Will was the last one aboard, and he clapped Ferris on the shoulder with great affection, and we're reminded how he had been among the original 11 with Ferris and Roan, and how that was a famed resistance group on Balasa that now numbers thousands. And Ferris asks if Amy didn't want to join him, and Will says that he left her in charge of USA, and they have some operations going that need her expertise, and he'll miss her. We're told that the resistance leaders are staying in the luxurious salon, with their heads together, speaking of strategies and plans. And Trevor is in the cockpit with Ferris, and we're told Trevor has noted a change. He's noticed a change in Ferris. Even through the danger and chaos, Ferris had kept his sense of humour. But now there was a grimness to his mouth, and his gaze often seemed far away. And he wonders if it's his grief over Rowan's death, or if it's something else, and he can't figure it out. And we're told that for the first time since he's met Ferris, he's afraid to challenge him. It says a dark shadow hung on him like an old coat. Trevor wished Ferris would just shrug it off. And Ferris asks how the double agent's business is going these days, and if he's planning to quit anytime soon. And Ferris says that's the plan. And Trevor asks what he's waiting for, because he investigated all the Force sensitives and didn't come up with any Jedi. It seems like it's time to check out. And Ferris says, and something shuts down in Ferris, and Trevor can tell. And Ferris explains that it's not that simple, and that it's time to jump to hyperspeed. And then the warning lights come up on the console and begin blinking. And he says, "What's this? The hyperdrive shows a malfunction." And Trevor says it's brand new. Maybe it's just the indicator, and he'll do a systems check. And a moment later, he figures out that it's the transpacitor, which I'm going to really struggle to say that transpacitor throughout this, and it gets mentioned quite a few times. So, but Trevor says it's the transpacitor, and he's getting a failure reading. And Ferris tells Trevor to take over the flights, and Ferris makes his way out the cockpit to the engines, and he comes back out covered in grease with the transpacitor. And he says, "I don't get it. Without this, we can't risk hyperspeed. We're going to have to land and replace it. Now, this is an easy repair. I can do it myself." And he strides over to the nav computer and flicks through the star maps, and he says, "Oh, we're deep in Imperial territory. And not only that, they're outside the core now. And it could happen at a worse place, because they're going to have to land at Halitron 7. And Will suddenly looms in the doorway and says, "Halitron? There are 3 garrisons there. The spaceport is the main takeoff point for Imperial ships. What's going on?" And Ferris says that they have no choice and explains the transpacitor is out. And says that if the Imperials don't check the double registry, they'll be fine. And he says that they all should stay aboard, and he'll get the parts and fix it. And he says it's a basic repair, should only take a few hours. And then another resistance leader comes, Bor Bennu, and says we're landing. He says we were supposed to head straight to the secret base. And Ferris explains there's an engine trouble, and Bor Bennu says, "Was this engine trouble? Wasn't there a systems check before we set off? If I ran my resistance like that, I'd be in an Imperial jail." And Ferris can't argue with him because he's right. And we're told that he had done systems check, but you can't catch everything. Now, systems check on the engines, but you can't catch everything. And the transpacitor failed mid-flight, and he says that we're going to have to set down, let's accept it and keep calm. And Bor Bennu's a bit frustrated and he retreats, and Will says to Ferris that they're all a bit jumpy and they don't want anything to go wrong. And Ferris tells him that something always goes wrong, the trick is fixing it. Ferris calls in the register. Now we cut away to Halitron. Now Ferris is arriving now they're all arriving at Halitron. And Ferris calls in the registry, and they're cleared to land, and they land inside the hangar. And as they're landing, as they're making their way there, Trevor swallows at the sight of the Imperial ships, starships, cruisers, TIE fighters, the capital ships, and just stormtroopers everywhere. And Ferris and Trevor says, "This is one crazy new moon day. Bad luck would be good luck compared to this." And Ferris says it's okay, they can do this. He says he'll just wheel them into the hangar and they can keep a low profile. And they make their way in, and he pokes his head into the resistance leaders, and Bor Bennu says they've taken a vote and explains that if he doesn't make the fix within an hour, they're all going to be splitting up and fighting the transport back to their own worlds. And the holocron speaks, "How dare you defy me?" And Ferris, it's keeping his breathing even, but thinks, "Oh, there's that voice again." And Ferris says it's more dangerous than waiting to go out. And Ball says they've scrambled before, it doesn't worry us, and sitting here waiting to and says that sitting here waiting to be arrested is much, much worse. And Ferris says that it will get them off the planet within the hour. And Ball suggests that they go to the cantina and act as normally as possible and make it seem like this is a routine repair stop. And Ferris says that he thinks they should stay aboard and it will attract less attention that way. And Ball says if they check that registry, they'll be in trouble. And they'd rather be in a position to jump on a passenger ship than be stuck in this ship and get arrested. And Ferris inclines his head because he can't tell them what to do, unfortunately, and as he's leaving the ship, Will catches up to him and explains that he tried to reason with them, but Ball spooks them and he doesn't trust him. And Trevor says he's pretty jittery for a resistance leader, and Ferris says, I don't blame him, there's a lot to be jittery about, but we've gone through too much to have everything fall apart now. If I'm not back in an hour, steal the ship and take off. And then Ferris strides through the hangar, heading for a bank of turbo lifts, and he makes his way up to the surface of he starts making his way to the surface of the planet. We're told that he counts on there being plenty of repair shops nearby, nearby this busy spaceport, and he says that was a given. But he also had to find a place where questions weren't asked. But luckily, places that sell parts are usually that way. And as the turbo lift drops, Ferris feels the motion, so he's free falling, and he gets a sense that, and he once again feels a sense of his mind being divided, and we're told it's happening more frequently now, and several times on the trip he had to restrain himself from telling Trevor to stop asking questions. And he remembered a time not long ago he used to enjoy Trevor's talk. And it says, he had known it sprang from a combination of youth and nervousness and affection, and had joined in with the boys' banter. Now it just made his brain explode. And we're told that when Bohr had taken the vote to leave, if he didn't succeed, he had felt fury out of proportion to the decision. And we're told how the anger had been startling to Ferris. And the turbo lift doors open, and Ferris feels the breeze on his damp neck. And Ferris knows the feelings are caused by the holocron. And he thinks the trick was not to be intimidated by them. If he was going to learn how to draw power from the dark side, then he was going to have to navigate some bumpy waters. And we're told that when Will touched his arm as he was leaving, Ferris had also experienced a flare of anger. Now, for a moment, Will seemed like a shadow, and Ferris looked like he had to look at Will and Trevor as though they were behind a screen. He felt no emotion for them except anger, and Ferris knows that that's not like him at all. That's not him, that's not like him at all. And the holocron says, but it is you. It is you. Recognise it and begin your journey to what you can be. And he says that you are learning that others just impede your progress. And that's where we end the chapter. It's nice to see that. Again, it was nice to see how that little bit at the start, like it's like old times. It's nice to get that. But it is one thing I wasn't expecting for some odd reason was Trevor picking up that something's wrong with Ferris. It's even strange that even the not a care in the galaxy, Trevor is scared about Ferris now. And Trevor usually doesn't have a care in the world, does he? But it's quite interesting that he's picked up on that, and it's also quite interesting to see how Ferris is starting to get annoyed with Trevor because of the holocron. And I think, like, to us, it's, just throw the holocron away! But for Ferris, it's not that simple. He knows the holocron can help him defeat Vader. And that's why he keeps holding on to it. That's why he keeps it so close to him. He's needs to learn from it, but wants to learn from it, not need, but he wants to. But it's happening at the cost of pretty much himself. And I know there's going to be a lightsaber duel, or at least a confrontation between Ferrus and Vader at the end, in this book. So it's going to be interesting to see if the holocron has any help, has any relevance in that duel there, whether Ferrus thinks he'll need it or not. So, yeah. Also, Ball Bennu, that's a really good name. Ball Bennu. That was quite a funny name. Again, I don't have a whole lot to say for this chapter, really. Oh, come on, what else can we talk about? Yeah, Trevor is, to me, we just can't understand why Ferrus can't leave being a double agent, So it's just delicious, leave. That's just how Trevor sees it. It's just leave Ferrus. It's not that hard. But, to Ferrus it's not that simple either. Sorry, I just noticed, at least in my copy, the pages keep getting folded. Someone kept folding these pages. Don't do that. I've already had one folded page in chapter 3. I think it was, or 4. Don't fold pages. But anyway, yeah, I quite enjoy this chapter. But then again, I enjoy all chapters. And again, it is interesting to see how Ferrus is kind of slowly losing himself because of the holocron. Even his closest friends, he's starting to get angry at. He's getting angry at Will. He's getting angry at Trevor. And it's almost a bit terrifying to wonder what would that have been like if he was with Roan. I think if it was Roan, Ferrus would probably have been able to pull himself out from the holocron. But because he's using the holocron because of Roan's death, rather than having the holocron on him and then interacting with Roan and it's giving him unwanted thoughts, I think because Roan has died, it's pushing him to use the holocron as well. Because he wants to avenge his death with Vader, even though Roan didn't want him to avenge it. But yeah, it's very interesting to see how this holocron is really just messing Ferrus up. Also, you can kind of see from Ferrus's perspective, like, just stay in the ship. You can see it from both perspectives, though. It's stay in the ship. It won't take long. Try and take a very long time to prepare it, but also if they stay there for too long, especially because it's Halitron 7, which is an incredibly populated Imperial world. They can't risk exposure, but yeah, I understand it from both perspectives. So it's going to be interesting to see what winds up happening. But we won't get that next chapter because we're continuing with Clive and Astri next chapter. So yeah. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 7 of Last of the Jedi Reckoning. I know I'm technically almost halfway through the book, but it still feels like I'm at the towards the start. I'm only a few chapters away from being halfway through. There's only 21 chapters and this is chapter 7, but yeah, it just doesn't feel quite right. But anyway, Clive and Astri are well hidden in Eve Yarrow's bedroom, but Clive wonders if they were really as secure as they thought, but they can jump through the window and land on soft ground if they had to. And I can hear him question the servant below, and he's saying how Eve Yarrow was supposed to meet him here, and he says to the servant, "Are you telling me she's not coming?" And the servant says that she doesn't know. She does not know. She contacted her yesterday to ready the house, and she didn't say when she'd arrive. She doesn't give her schedule. And there's a long silence. That's must have terrified the servant, and Vader informs her to go about her duties. And then Clive puts his eye to the crack in the door, and the servant scurries off, and Vader activates his comlink. And Vader starts speaking with Palpatine, and says Yarrow is not here. No message here for me either. Are you telling me that Twilight must be cancelled? It is already in play. It is time to awaken our mole. Then I will check the emergency drop. Nothing had better go wrong this time. And Vader says that he's proceeding, and Clive struggles to hear what's being said over Vader's footsteps. And he hears something about the Bespin system and Coruscant. And then the footsteps pause, and he hears Vader say, "The preliminary weapon will be tested and Twilight will come to a close." And Clive can't hear the Emperor's response because of Vader's walking again, and with relief he recognises the sound of the front door opening, and as she lets out a breath she's been holding. But the door doesn't close, and Vader's standing there waiting. Then the servant comes down the hall asking if there's anything else he can do for him. And Vader asks if anyone's been here besides him, and the servant says no visitors here aside from herself. And Yarrow got this place for peace and quiet, and that there's never any visitors here except Vader and herself, even though she's not technically a visitor. And Vader's getting impatient with her bumbling and just walks off back to his ship. And moments later, the caretaker comes with a bag of food, and explains that he's taken off, and that they better get going. And she says to do me a favour, don't come back. And Clive says, "Don't worry, we won't." And then they hike their way back to their ship. And as she says that she can't tell what all that was about, but she knows there are some crucial nuggets of information there. And Clive says, "Twilight again. We've got to contact Ferris. He's got pieces. We've got pieces of the puzzle. Maybe he can put it together." And as soon as they get to the ship, they try contacting Ferris. They have no luck. They try Solace, try Yarrow, Dexter's safe house, still no luck. Clive says like, "This is strange," and he doesn't like it. And Astrid says they're going to have to try Toma at the base. And she knows that it should only be used in emergencies, but this is an emergency. And luckily they're able to get through to Toma, but the storm's picking up, so the connection isn't very good. And Toma explains that they're on comm silence, and they picked up some new ships at the Galactic Luxury Cruiser Convention, and they're all headed towards the base. He explains the safe house is gone, but Keats, Curran and Dex are in hiding and fine, and that's all Toma knows. And then something pings in Clive. He finally knows where he saw Eve Yarrow, and the thing that he'd been struggling to recall. And he says, the Galactic Luxury Cruiser Convention. That's where I saw her. Eve? Astrid asks. Flame. She is Eve Yarrow. I always knew she looked familiar. And that time she was wounded on Banasa, and I saw her lying down with her eyes closed. She looks really familiar. I was there at the convention, maybe 5 years ago, and Eve Yarrow got hit accidentally by a prototype airspeeder that went hairy. She was knocked out for a minute. It caused all kinds of commotion. I helped her up. I remember her now. The hair is different, but it's Flame. And Astrid is in a lot of distress now because it's Vader was here to meet with Flame. To meet with Eve Yarrow, and they now definitely know Flame is an Imperial agent. And Toma asks if they're still there because again, the storm's picking up, and the atmospherical storm or whatever it was. And Clive leans in and speaks urgently, saying that they must tell Ferris to contact them. And he must delay the meeting, and because Flame is an enemy agent, they should not bring anyone to the place. and they're starting to lose the connection, and he repeats saying, do you read me? Flame is an agent of the Empire. And to his relief, Toma's voice comes through saying, I read you, Flame is the enemy. The storm's intensifying. I'm going to lose the signal, but I'll keep trying. Don't worry. And the communication ends, and Clive says, the guy must be kidding. Worrying is all I do. And then we cut to Vader, who's making his way back to Coruscant. And he's in his fury leaving now, but he knows it's going to pick back up when he sees Eve again. And he thinks the operation's in jeopardy and it can't fail. And the comm unit blinks, and he sees it's from a high-ranking member of the security corps that he has enlisted to monitor reports over the security channel for certain areas he's keeping an eye on. And he reports Clive and Astri's invasion, but he doesn't refer to them by name because they don't know it's Clive and Astri. But he reports their invasion on Nero 11 and how they were trying to scam her, and how they believe that they were trying to scam Herc, Bloomy, and Rob, and rob some money from the bank accounts on there. But they ran when the routine check came up, and they stole the cruiser of a blank employee called Herc Bloomy. And Vader goes, they escaped. And the officer says that it wasn't clear they were criminals at the time. And Vader says, do they know what account they were attempting to infiltrate? And the officer says he does not have that information. And according to Bloomy, they hasn't got far enough in their scan. Vader says he wants Bloomy under interrogation, make sure he's telling the truth. And he asks if they have the cruiser's registry number. And the officer goes, of course, it's been reported as stolen. And Vader says to put it through the highest security search, he wants that ship. When he closes the communication channel, but he doesn't like this. He thinks it could mean nothing, but he didn't like the coincidence. Because Eve Yarrow's accounts were on Nero 11, and just now he felt something was amiss at a retreat. And he thinks that someone's on Eve Yarrow, so he contacts Hydra, and she says, I am at your service, Lord Vader. And Vader asks where Ferrus is, and she says that they completed their investigations, and he went back to Coruscant to receive their next orders. And Vader asks if she's heard from him since he returned, and Hydra says no, and that she's scheduled to meet with him after she ties up some loose ends here on Alderaan. And Vader tells her to forget her orders. He needs her to track a ship, and he gives her the registry numbers, and tells her to detain the ship and arrest whoever is aboard, and she must give this her highest priority. And Hydra goes, yes, Lord Vader. This is your last chance to redeem yourself. Things on Alderaan did not go well. Contact me when it is done, then I might have need of you again. And Vader blasts off to hyperspace to return to Coruscant, and that's where we end the chapter. This feels like a chapter that should be at the end of the book. In like leading into the final act, it feels like that's what this chapter should be. But it's like in the first half of the second act. It feels weird, and I think it is because it's a book on its own, but it's also the last book in the series, which means stuff like this happening so early should be logistical and happening. It just doesn't feel quite right. So it feels a bit odd, but yeah, I get now. I did spoil myself on Eve and Eve being Flame. From now on, I'm probably just going to keep referring to Eve as Flame from now on, given we now know she definitely is. And again, I spoiled myself on Flame. I spoiled myself. But it's not the worst thing. They have throughout her entire time in these books. There has been mentions of, is she really trustworthy? Ferrus was saying we can't trust her. We don't know what she's about in Return of the Dark Side, and then as these books went on, there was more questions going on. So about whether she was trustworthy or not, you know. So there was a lot of so, you know, it was kind of a thing with Flame as to whether she was trustworthy or not throughout these books. But yeah, I'm really getting a bad feeling about Toma now, because I really do not want him to be a mole as well. I really do not want him to be a mole as well, because I just can't see Toma. I cannot see Toma as a mole. But I'm getting a really bad feeling that he is. I'm getting a really bad feeling that he is. And it's... I hope if he does wind up being a spy, that we get an explanation as to why, because otherwise it would just feel really out of character. It would feel really out of character otherwise, given just how devastated he was when, you know, he gave up fighting the Empire in the Luthen at Obi-Wan's command, and they destroyed the Luthen. You know, he was absolutely devastated. So I don't think I could. I don't think I would be too happy if he just wound up being a mole without an explanation being given as to why or how. You know. Because it's like, how would he contact the Empire, you know, and not really draw their attention to it. But anyway, I think we can kind of tell that Flame is tied to Twilight. You know, again, I spoiled myself on her being a mole all the way back in Return of the Dark Side. So when Vader mentions the mole here, I know he's talking about Flame. But yeah, I gotta stop looking at Wikipedia, particularly on articles that are quite fleshed out. Gotta stop looking at stuff. But yeah. What else can we talk about? Again, this is not looking good for Clive and Astrid. This is not looking good for them. This is not looking good for them at all. So yeah. What else can we talk about? Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to talk about. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, this chapter took me a little while to get through, but I've just read chapter 8 of Last of the Jedi, Reckoning. I've for some reason wanted to say Against the Empire again, and this chapter is actually 12 pages long. This was quite a long chapter. So first he's walking by the stores. He's walking by some parts stores, and he's going past ones that are organised. They have them all organised in gleaming rows, and we'll get them there in seconds, because he's looking for one that's a bit older, a little bit more cluttered, and wasn't doing so well, and will be glad for business. And he finds it he finds that half a kilometre away from the spaceport. And he's looking for it because they'd be more willing to not ask questions. They won't ask as many questions. And he sees it, and the grimy laser sign is blinking, and it doesn't even fully have all the letters on it. It says Teuton Stars IP Repair RS. He figures if a repair shop couldn't be bothered to repair its own sign, it would be safe to think the people inside would help him without asking too many questions. So he makes his way in, and there's a Corrivar there who's covered in grease, and we talked about how the Empire have been trying to move non-humans out of the core worlds, and that this Corrivan will more than likely not be a fan of the Empire. And he goes, "Children at your service. We have everything you need. Everything guaranteed." And Ferris looks around the cluttered shop and just wonders how Teuton could find anything in there. And he asks for a transpacitor, and he says that's not a problem, and he has many models in stock, and he says, let me show you and you can choose. And he leads him over to a wall full of drawers, and Ferris looks through the parts and begins wondering if some of them were defective. And Susan says that what you don't understand. What you don't understand is grease makes these parts work. You slip them in right into your engine, power up, and they hum like babies. Look, I only procure the best from our customers. And Ferris scans the parts, and he's not an expert, but he knows engines, and these parts are in good shape. And he tries trying to find a re-weld seam, and Susan says that there's no re-weld parts in that drawer, only the best. And says, did you come through a magnetic storm on the way? Here, because that can make them go wonky if they're not calibrated, so just so by a good mechanic, not a smidge off, because if not, woof, bam, smoke, and you're in trouble. These new models with the twin ion engines, very fancy, right? But they don't tell you about that, do they? And Ferris chooses one, and no. Sorry about that. Anyway, Ferris chooses a transpacitor, and he says, and Susan says that's an excellent choice, and he says, discerning customer, I like that. And he smiles, and his teeth are as black as his cranial crown, and Ferris just wishes he hadn't smiled. He follows him back to his cluttered desk, and he takes out a battered dot pad and asks just some routine questions, like an ID registry number of the ship. And Ferris knows this is coming, and we're told that the Empire's trying out a new policy at major spaceports, forcing part dealers to obtain ship registry numbers for major parts requests. It's just another way to keep track of ships going in and out, and another regulation, another tax, and another way for the Empire to track Ferris. And he leans over the counter and he holds out a couple credits in his hands and says, do we really need to do this? It's such a small part, it would fit in my pocket, and I could walk out of here. And Tootin goes, true, and the regulations are so, true, and the regulations are so pushy. What a bunch of meddlers those officials are. And Ferris says, all that paperwork just for one transpacitor. And Tootin eyes the credits and says that the transpacitors are expensive. And Ferris says they're getting more expensive all the time, and he adds more credits to the pile, and Tootin grabs them all and says that now that they've made such a nice deal, he'll tell him what he'll do. He'll go and fetch a spare re-welded transpacitor as a backup. Then he can tell everyone he knows to come to Tootin's to get the best deal in the mid-room. And he goes to the back, and Ferris waits, and he waits, and he waits. Nothing. But he starts to get an uneasy feeling, and he thinks it's maybe time to go. And he turns to go, and then he sees the stormtroopers in the front window, and they're pulling up in a land speeder. So he vaults over the desk and makes his way into the back room to see Tootin pushing his way between two piles of parts, and he says that he's sorry and that they threaten to close his shop if he doesn't inform anybody who doesn't want to give him any registry numbers. If he doesn't want to give them their registry numbers, he has to tell. And he says sorry again. Ferris ignores him and heads for the back exit. And the stormtroopers just about turn the corner and open fire on him, and he leaps up and it hits the door, which blasts it to smithereens. And he runs across the top of the roof and then onto the next, and he keeps getting shot at. He doesn't get hit, but he's getting shot at. And he thinks that this isn't good. He's just meant to slip in and out, fix the chip and be off, and now he has stormtroopers on his tail and he can't lead them back to the spaceport, can he? And so he leaps down from the roof into the next alley, and he saw that there was a maze of alleys behind all the shops, connecting them to a utility lane on one side. And we're told one of the skills he'd learned as a Jedi was a practical one. Jedi didn't get lost. He'd had enough memory drills at the temple, exercises called urban pursuit, in which he's had to memorise a map of a large city in a matter of minutes and then plot an escape route in a matter of seconds, following a trial run through the streets of a quadrant of Galactic City. So a twisted maze of alleys shouldn't have been a problem. And we're told he has an advantage because he's on foot and the stormtroopers are in land speeders, which have a lot more speed, but they don't have as much manoeuvrability given the size of the alleys. Some of them are barely bigger than the width of Ferris's shoulders. and he has to dodge garbage and other shop owners. And he turns left and right and goes and then left again in a series of twists and switchbacks, and sometimes he could hear the hum of the land speeders and repulsor lift engines, but he would double back and then dodge behind some convenient heap of parts or garbage, and the noise would grow fainter, and he'd be told that things would have been doable if he just hadn't run out of the alleyways, and that if he hadn't heard the doubling, then the tripling of an engine noise, and it says, and if he hadn't heard the doubling, then tripling of engine noise. Airspeeders now capable of flying over the alleyways. They'd sent in reinforcements, and Trevor knows he'll eventually be cornered, and he just can't outrun this amount of Imperials. And you can hear the noise of the engine circling, waiting for him to emerge, and he knows he'd be spotted and captured if he does emerge. So he contacts Trevor. Ferris contacts Trevor, and Trevor asks if he has the transpacitor, and he says he's got it, and Trevor asks if everything is okay, and Ferris says, "Great, where are our passengers?" And Trevor explains they went to the cantina, and he says that Will and him are on the ship but they're about to follow in, and Ferris thinks quickly and says that alright, find tables on the terrace, the one nearest to the runway, and watch for me. When I give the signal, get everyone aboard. And Trevor goes, okay, got it, and we'll be ready. And Ferris follows his tracks back down the alley, and he recognises that he's come full circle. He's gone round in a loop, and he's looking for another one of the shops that he'd seen. And eventually he finds it, and he stops in front of Speed Sing Message RZ for all you are needs. And there's a pen that holds a bunch of battered array of swoops, which just more look like engines with seats and handlebars. And there's a bunch of kids. There's there's a group of youths there, leaning against the walls of the building, and they're watching Ferris with flat gazes. And we're told how the messenger boys and girls were often recruited from the poorer sections of cities, and were paid little and worked hard, with long hours and much abuse. And we're told that on some parts of Asian communications, messages were just much more quicker to get messages from between things than their communication networks. Ferris nods at them, and he asks who the fastest there is, and one of the kids says ditto, which I hate that word, ditto. I hate it so much. I hate it with a burning passion. It really gets to me, that word. I absolutely hate it, but for some reason, and it really, really frustrated me when I read when I read his name was Ditto. It didn't grate me as much as it went on, and luckily Ditto doesn't have a major role, but that word really gets to me, Ditto. And we're told that one of the kids says Ditto, and he's the one. And Ferris looks at pretty much the engines with seats, and Ferris goes, on these machines, and Ditto says, if you got the stuff, it shouldn't matter what you're sitting on, but not many have the stuff. And Ferris says, so do you think you do? And Ditto goes, I said I did, didn't I? And Ferris says it's because he's got a job that pays, but he needs someone who's not only fast, but who can manoeuvre through traffic, heavy traffic. And Ditto rolls his eyes and sighs, and says that space traffic is easy if you go fast enough, and the others would just get out of your way. And then Ferris asks about stormtroopers. The boy says they only think they know how to drive. And the girl standing next to him, who is called Lauren, Lauren without an E, and she's got red hair, and she's Ditto's sister. and says that he's got to clear all jobs through the boss, who's inside, and Ferris says he doesn't want to go through his boss, through their boss, and Ferris knows what he's asking, because if anyone did a job for him, they'd risk dismissal. But he says that the job will take less than 3 minutes, and Ditto here will be the first rider, but he needs the rest of them too, and he says he'll pay triple rates. And Ditto says this is becoming an almost interesting proposition. And Lauren says that they better see the credits first. We're told that Flame had luckily given everyone had given them all substantial amounts of credits before they all left, and Ferris asks who wants to work for them, and says that he hands half of them now, and he says he'll hand them the other half once they get to the cantina at the terrace, at the spaceport. And the rest of the messengers look at Ditto and and Lauren. They seem to be the leaders, and they say, and Ditto goes, "Why not? It's been a slow day." So they start making their way through, and they even come across stormtroopers, but they pretty much ignore them. They're used to the messengers' shenanigans, I guess. And so they keep close around Ferris and Ditto, and Ferris is just glad he was a good enough pilot to keep up with them, and Ditto says that he's not bad for a space pilot. And when they eventually, when they clear the airspeeders, he signals to Ditto that he's leaving, and he goes off into the spaceport and to the hangar. And he abandons the sloop and activates the ramp on the cruiser. He makes his way in, replaces the transpacitor. He does a systems check, makes sure it's makes sure the transpacitor is calibrated perfectly, and everything's flashing green. He's good to go, and he starts up the cruiser and contacts Trevor on the comlink at the same time, and says, "Be ready, I'll be there in 30 seconds. "But I haven't finished my bantha burger." Ferris grinned. He knew Trevor would be ready. That's such a Trevor response. "I haven't finished my bantha burger." But he manoeuvres the cruiser out of the hangar, and out into the spaceport, what he calls for clearance at a tower. And he heads toward the cantina, and he sees all the resistance leaders and Trevor's blue hair at a corner table, and he can't hear the buzz of conversation, but he can imagine it. And his comm unit crackles to life, and an officer says, "Report to control office," and they checked the registry number and seen that it was only temporary. And Ferris activates the comm and says, "Don't read that. Heading for departures, and we'll check in with departure agent. Over. Check in at control office. Over. Over," Ferris mutters, shutting down the comm. And he stops outside the terrace, and Trevor already has the leaders moving towards the cruiser. And Ferris is counting the seconds now, and the airspeeder patrols come into the spaceport, and the red light flashes near the departure area, and he thinks they must have traced Ferris here, and they close down the spaceport. The messengers suddenly appear. They suddenly appear out of nowhere. They're piloting their sloops and starts flying in circles, pretty much having to have all the air speeders have to do evasive manoeuvres, go around them as such, and luckily no one's catching the leaders. No one notices the leaders as they hurry aboard the ship. Ferris says to Will to take over, and he leaps out and hands Ditto the credits, and he runs back in and closes the ramp. And he says to Trevor that it's time to get out, and they lift off into the crowded sky, and Ditto and the others flank him for a bit, and Ditto gives him a salute, and Ferris zooms away, and 10 Imperial ships are flying after them, and within seconds they reach the upper atmosphere, and Trevor says that they're splitting into 2 groups, the Imperial ships, and Will says they may not be authorised to leave the planet's atmosphere, but they can send out a galaxy-wide alert, and they stare out to the Imperial fighters, just willing them to turn back. And Ferris pushes the engines, and he's close now. He has a fast ship and enough lead time, and the fighters just can't catch him, and one by one they drop. And Will says that was too close, and Trevor says Ferris always pulls it out. And the next stop's at the asteroids, but they still have quite a way to go. Now they're on the Imperial Alert list. And that's where we end off the chapter. This was quite... This took me 17 chapters, 17 minutes to do, okay. I think this was quite an action-packed chapter. It almost takes you back to the Dark Warning days. Because if you remember when we were reading, when I was going through Dark Warning, one of my biggest complaints of that book was just how every single chapter had to have an action scene. It feels like, I think there's only like 2 or 3, maybe 4 chapters in that book that do not have an action scene. Every other chapter, you know, that was like I think it was like a 16, 17 chapter book. Pretty much every chapter in that book had to have an action scene. But anyway, I quite enjoyed this chapter, if it was a bit long, and I did have a couple of interruptions reading it. Again, you can't get to see how the Empire's influence is, you know, they're forcing the repair shops to hand over information. You see how their influence is impacting everyday life, and it was quite a good chapter in terms of the stress as well. It had quite a good balance of kind of everything going on. There was stress, there was intensity, there was humour. You know, there was quite a lot in this chapter that really worked quite well, and I like that it felt more like a chapter that you would have seen like the first 4 books. It definitely felt like a chapter that we would have seen in those first 4 books in the series, you know. And I think that's probably the one thing about this book that's feeling quite good. It feels like a return to roots for the series. So I think that's one of the things that makes this, that I think this book really feels quite good with. And it almost feels a bit like a bridge between the original and the, well, not a bridge, but kind of connecting the threads between the original kind of format of the series and the later format of the series. So I quite enjoy that. What else? Again, I really hate his name was Ditto. I really hate that. It was great seeing that when it was the first couple of times it was brought up. Not as much as it went on, but it was frustrating to have a character named Ditto. It's just like, ugh. I really hate that word. Really, that word really gets to me. Do not say Ditto to me. So yeah. Again, it was maybe a little bit confusing as to how Ferris escaped the attention of them, even though it's established that, you know, if he couldn't get out of that little corner he was in without not being noticed. You know, it did feel, because he said something like that, he would get noticed if he emerged. So it definitely did seem a bit, and that's choose Watson's writing for you. Okay, you know, she'll occasionally say that it's impossible to do something and then they do something, you know. I still remember that, what was it, like chapter 17? At the end of chapter 17 in Desperate Mission, you know, Ferris is being brought back into the garrison, and it says that Obi-Wan could not fly down there in time to rescue him, and then the very next chapter he flies down there in time to rescue him. So it definitely was a bit, so, you know, that she has some contradictory writing before. She's done contradictory writing before, and she's done a lot of contradictory writing with Hydra. But, you know, it's not the biggest deal a lot of the time. It's not the biggest deal, and, you know, you need to put forward the story in some way, and it's not like the biggest deal. It just can feel a bit cheap sometimes when it's to sell us something, and then it completely defies what you just sold us 2 minutes ago. Or, you know, quite a while ago. It does feel a bit like, at times, but it's not the worst. um, um, it definitely felt like it was picking up quite a lot of pace at the end. It felt like it was really something. I think if there was one complaint about this chapter, it felt maybe a bit slow up until Ferris finally got back to up until I guess Ferris got back to the spaceport or was riding with Ditto's little gang. It definitely felt a bit slow up until that point. I think it really started picking up speed at that point. And that's also really where the intensity really started to come in at that point. It was when he was fighting. It's from that point onwards when he was fighting with Ditto's gang. It definitely, that's really when the intensity started to come in. But it do feel a bit like a bit of a slow chapter. You know, that's like that whole the thing with the whole thing with Ditto is just about over halfway through the chapter. So it's a 12-page chapter. You know, and that came in at like page 7 or 8 of the chapter. So it definitely felt like it could have been done maybe a little bit sooner. It could have picked up a bit more pace a little bit sooner when the action actually started. Because even when the action did start, it didn't necessarily feel like it was very fast paced. And yeah, I think that's probably the main problem with this chapter. It definitely feels like it's quite slow paced. It didn't feel like it was quite. It felt like it was taking its time initially. And even though that can be good in certain situations, I think it would have benefited this chapter if it wasn't taking its time as much. I think it would have benefited if it was going a little bit quicker. I think it just would have been a bit better if it got a bit quicker once the action started. Because I think it just didn't quite. It felt, again, because of how long this chapter is, I think you need to alleviate some of the, especially for Last of the Jedi, 12 pages is quite long. I know for a lot of books that's quite short, that's kind of average or below average, but I know for Last of the Jedi, you know, the average page length comes in at about 5 pages, or 6 pages, or 7 pages. 12 pages is quite a lot for Last of the Jedi. It's quite a lot. So I think if this chapter has picked up a bit more pace during the whole scene where Ferris is running from the stormtroopers before he's with Ditto's gang, that probably would have helped alleviate some of the drag from this chapter. I think, and I think that is probably the big problem with it. If there is a problem with it. What else can we talk about? I like how the holocron did not have much of an influence in this chapter. I like that it didn't get brought up at all in this chapter, and I think that kind of just, again, it kind of makes you miss those days of the I keep saying those days. It kind of makes you miss the time before Tangled Web, where it was, where Ferris, you know, he just was travelling around the galaxy trying to find Jedi and stop Malorum. You know, it makes you miss those stories, and I think the lack of the Sith Holocron's involvement in this chapter just makes it feel so much more like it's gone back to its Last of the Jedi's gone back to its roots, and I quite enjoyed how it went back. How this chapter feels like it could have just as easily have been part of those original 4 books. The lack of holocron just again allows you to see Ferris's genuality. Is that a word? I don't think it is, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Genuality, as in genuine. How you see how he's a good-hearted person, but he's also a little bit crafty. You know, he knows the inner workings of how the Empire works and does stuff, and he's able to work around that and use that to his advantage. And that's something that I think we maybe been missing a little bit when it comes to the Sith Holocron. It feels like he's maybe pushing him a bit outside of his character, I think. And I know that's the point. But it definitely it doesn't quite hit. It doesn't quite. feel as right since he's had the holocron, you know. He hasn't quite felt as right since probably Secret Weapon, and I know that's mainly because of Roan's death. And, you know, I think the grief he has had has done wonders for his character. I think it really has added quite a new layer to his character. But it definitely feels a bit like in Against the Empire, we didn't really get. It feels like we didn't see a whole lot of him. For the most part, he was just investigating in Against the Empire. So it definitely felt like that. So it felt like we maybe missed a bit out on his character there. And then when we moved into Master of Deception, you know, he's got the holocron, and he has the holocron here. So this really feels like a chapter where we finally are able to see Ferrus after Roan's death without the holocron. A genuine Ferrus. Though it's not, it doesn't quite feel like a grieving Ferrus. It just feels like normal Ferrus, you know. So it's something. It's one of those things where it's we kind of still. I think we still kind of need to see a grieving Ferrus without any influence from a holocron or being any focused on the mission, being completely focused on the mission. But I think that's probably something we're not going to see too much of. You know, we kind of had that at the end of Secret Weapon, but, you know, he was ready to just die at that point, you know. He didn't want to continue going without Roan. By the time we moved into Against the Empire, you know, he was wanting to use the dark side, he was busy investigating, you know. There wasn't a whole lot of time to really see what Ferrus is like doing a normal mission as without influence from the dark side or holocron, you know. And I think that's maybe something that maybe has or the mission, you know, pushing taking more prevalence of his character in a way. It's something I've only just realised, really. But yeah, it's nice to see, you know, a chapter where we have kind of just gone back to Ferrus's character a bit and focusing on that a bit more. Of course, not massively. It is still a mission, you know, but we get to see a bit more of how his character works, you know, and I think that was quite nice to go back to. And, you know, we have his interviewer again. How's things going? Great! But, yeah, I think that will bring an end to this chapter. This is already quite a long review. So, yeah, thank you all for watching. And goodbye.